In this video, I'm going to do numerous examples of drawing free body diagrams. I want to begin with a reminder of how I go about labeling my forces. So I always use these subscripts. The first subscript tells you what's causing the force. The second subscript tells you what is experiencing the force. So the force caused by object A acting on object B would be FAB. The force experienced or force caused by object B experienced by object A would be FBA. I also use the labels big N for normal force, little f for friction, W for weight, which remember is the force due to gravity, and T for tension. You may also see me use a capital F. That is a generic force that doesn't fall under the purview of one of the other four. Also keep in mind, if you can't identify what is causing the force, if you cannot identify the first subscript, then that force does not exist. You may want it. It may make you feel warm and fuzzy. And I'm sorry taking it away takes away the warm and fuzzy, but it does not exist. Okay. So here's my first example. I've done it up very nicely for you. We have a nail sitting on a table. So to draw a free body diagram, what I do is I represent my object with a dot. So this blue dot here represents the nail. I then represent the forces by drawing arrows. The tail of the arrow always starts at the dot, and the tip points in the direction of the force. So for example, the magnet is pulling the nail to the right, so here is the force due to the magnet acting on the nail. Gravity is pulling it downward, so there's a weight force by the earth on the nail. There is friction between the table and the nail. That is against the motion. If the friction weren't there, it would fly towards the magnet, so the friction must point to the left, caused by the table acting on the nail. And the last is a normal force between the table and the nail, which is supporting it, and that points upward, of course. Things that are not on my free body diagram. There's no net force, there's no acceleration. If I want to make some indication to remind me of those, I put them off to the side. Another thing to notice, the second subscript is always the same. It always represents the nail. And that's because this is the nail's free body diagram. Let's move on to the next example. Here we have a ball. I want to draw two free body diagrams, one for when we're ignoring air resistance and one for when we're not. What is the difference between the two? So, without air resistance, if you will, I represent the ball with a dot. There's no air resistance, that means there's no wind, there's only one force acting on the ball. It points downward, and that is the force of gravity caused by the earth acting on the ball. If we do it with air resistance, let's ignore any possible wind effect or anything like that. We still have gravity pulling it down. And both of these are the same because remember, weight can be calculated by using mg. Right? But with air resistance, we get another force. Now, air resistance is technically a type of friction, so we could use a little f or we can use a big F, whatever makes you happy. I'm going to use A for air acting on the ball. Okay. When these two forces, the air resistance force and the weight, become the same size, then the ball is no longer accelerating and I will have hit terminal velocity. That's what terminal velocity is. Example 3. We have a block sliding along the floor. So it doesn't say to ignore friction, so let's assume that we're not. It doesn't say that anything is pushing or pulling this, so what we have is we have a block that is just sliding to the side, and I'm going to make a little note down here that we have friction. Notice I started by drawing a picture, just so I could organize my thoughts. Okay, so we represent the block with a dot. There is a normal force between the block and the floor. There is gravity pulling it down, that is caused by the earth, and then I have friction. Since I've decided the velocity is going to be to the right, the friction opposes the motion. You know, I got my subscripts all wrong. Let's try this again. Eraser. I don't know why I did them backwards, but let's get them correct, shall we? Okay. The normal force is caused by the floor and is acting on the block. The weight is acting on the block, and the friction is between the floor and the block. Now notice, there is no force going to the right, even though that's the direction of the motion. You may want that force, but what is causing it? There's nothing pushing on it, there's nothing pulling on it. This block is just going across the floor. You don't know what got it into motion in the first place. Somewhere along the line there had to have been something, but we don't have that information. Therefore, there is no force, and there's not going to be a force. So if you think about it, that means that this block is going to have an acceleration in the direction of the friction, and that will cause the block to eventually slow down and stop because the velocity and the acceleration are in opposite directions. Okay, so here we have two blocks. I have a red block. Sorry. We'll just do it this way. I have a yellow block. And let's say they're sitting on a table. Draw their free body diagrams. Let's do the red blocks first. It has a normal force supporting it from the yellow block acting on the red block. And gravity is pulling it downward. The other thing I have is the yellow block. That has a normal force from the table acting on the yellow block, pushing it upward. It also has a normal force from the contact between the red block and the yellow block. And it has its weight pulling downward, and that's supposed to be a Y. There we go. Now, I'm just going to point out two forces here, NRY and NYR. Remember these. When we get to the Newton's third law section, you will hopefully realize that that is a third law force pair. Right there. Notice the subscripts are flipped.